The lanterns flicker weakly in the nightmare of Mensis, casting shadows that seem to breathe and writhe against stone walls that shouldn't exist. Edgar clutches his chest, feeling the cold seep through his choir garb, that distinctive white that once marked him as one of the elite, now nothing more than a beacon in this twisted realm of consciousness made manifest. He was sent here as a spy, tasked by his brothers and sisters in the upper Cathedral ward to infiltrate, to observe, to report back on what Micolash and his mad scholars were planning in their hidden village. But the school of Mensis had other plans for dear Edgar. They always knew he was there, watching from the shadows, and when the time came for their grand ritual, they made sure he would bear witness to it all, trapped forever in their nightmare. A testament to what happens when the healing church's highest echelons turn their blades against one another. Welcome, fellow seekers of forbidden knowledge, to another deep dive into the mysteries of the hunt with Keen 7 lore. Tonight, we descend into one of Yahar'gul's most devastating secrets, a civil war that tore the healing church apart from within, pitting its two most powerful factions against each other in a battle for the very nature of human evolution itself. This isn't just a story of political rivalry or petty squabbles over resources. No, what happened between the choir and the school of Mensis was something far more profound. An ideological schism so fundamental that it would ultimately doom both factions and leave Yahar'gul drowning in blood and madness. Picture, if you will, the healing church at the height of its power. The blood ministration has made Yahar'gul the envy of neighboring regions, drawing pilgrims and scholars from across the world. The lower priests tend to the masses, offering communion and healing. The church hunters prowl the streets, keeping the beast scourge at bay. But high above, in towers that pierce the very clouds, and deep below, in villages hidden from prying eyes, two groups of scholars work tirelessly toward a shared goal through radically different means. Both seek communion with the Great Ones, those cosmic beings whose very existence challenges everything humanity believes about its place in the universe. Both believe they can guide humanity's evolution to something greater. But where the choir seeks to ascend through careful study and gradual transformation, the school of Mensis pursues a more direct, more dangerous path, one that leads straight through nightmare itself. The roots of this conflict stretch back decades, perhaps even centuries, to a time when the healing church was still young and unified in purpose. Back then, there was no choir, no school of Mensis, just ambitious scholars who had followed Lawrence away from Bergenwerth, convinced that the old college's cautious approach would never yield the breakthroughs humanity needed. These early church scholars worked together, sharing discoveries from the labyrinth, experimenting with the old blood, pushing the boundaries of human understanding. But as their knowledge grew, so too did their differences in how to apply it. If you're enjoying this exploration into Bloodborne's hidden history, I'd genuinely appreciate if you'd hit that like button. It makes a real difference in helping this video reach fellow hunters and lore enthusiasts through YouTube's algorithm. Your support means everything and helps keep these in-depth investigations alive. The formation of what would become the choir can be traced to a singular discovery that changed everything. Deep within the Is Chalice dungeon, church explorers found something that should not have been possible. A great one. Alive but abandoned. Left behind when its kin ascended to higher planes of existence. Ebrietas, daughter of the cosmos, became the choir's greatest secret and most precious resource. Here was a living God, willing to commune with humanity, to share its knowledge and blood. The scholars who made this discovery believed they had found the key to peaceful evolution, a path to transcendence through understanding and gradual transformation. The Orphanage of the choir tells us everything we need to know about their methodology, They took children, young, malleable minds not yet fixed in their understanding of reality, and carefully, systematically expanded their consciousness, through controlled exposure to cosmic wisdom, through the phantasms they cultivated, through the arcane tools they developed. The choir sought to create a generation that could perceive and interact with realities beyond human comprehension. The augur of Ebrietas, that grotesque, partial summon that reaches through dimensional barriers, represents their philosophy perfectly. Careful, controlled contact with the cosmos, always maintaining the barrier between human and Great One, never fully crossing over until humanity was ready. The lumen flower gardens stand as perhaps their greatest achievement and most telling experiment. These otherworldly flowers, cultivated through methods that blend horticulture with cosmic horror, bloom with a light that isn't quite light, attracting beings from beyond our dimension. The celestial emissaries, those bulbous-headed creatures that patrol the gardens, were once human. Or perhaps they still are human, simply evolved beyond our narrow definition of the term. The choir saw them as success stories, proof that humanity could transcend its limitations without losing itself entirely to madness or beasthood. But while the choir gazed upward toward the cosmos, another faction within the church looked inward, toward the realm of consciousness and dream. The school of Mensis, led by the enigmatic Micolash, believed that the barrier between human and Great One wasn't something to be carefully crossed. It was something to be shattered entirely. Where the choir sought communion, Mensis sought union. Where the choir cultivated understanding, Mensis pursued experience. They didn't want to study the cosmos. They wanted to live in it, to make the nightmare realm of the Great Ones humanity's new reality. If you're finding value in uncovering these dark secrets of Yahar'gul, consider subscribing to support the channel and join our growing community of lore seekers. Your support truly makes these deep investigations possible, allowing us to piece together the fragments of stories that From Software has scattered throughout their worlds. The unseen village of Yahar'gul became Mensis's laboratory, a place where the boundaries between waking and sleeping, between life and death, between human and monster, became meaningless. The residents didn't volunteer for the school's experiments. They were taken, kidnapped from their beds by the Snatchers, those hulking figures with sacks slung over their shoulders, who serve as Mensis's procurement division. The connection to Hemwick Charnel Lane, with its witches who harvest eyes and brew mysterious concoctions, suggests a vast network of occult practitioners, all serving Mensis's grand design. The fundamental philosophical divide between these two factions cannot be overstated. The choir believed in elevation, raising humanity up to meet the Great Ones on their level. They saw the cosmos as a hierarchy to be climbed, with careful preparation and gradual ascension. Their white garb symbolized purity of purpose, intellectual clarity, the light of knowledge pushing back the darkness of ignorance. Every tool they created, from the Rosmarinus that sprays blessed mist to a core beyond that summons stellar projectiles, represents controlled application of cosmic power, always keeping the user grounded in physical reality while channeling forces from beyond. The school of Mensis, by contrast, embraced submersion. They didn't want to climb up to the cosmos. They wanted to pull it down to Earth. The Mensis cage, that grotesque iron apparatus that Micolash wears like a crown of thorns, isn't just a tool for gaining insight. It's a receiver, a conductor, designed to channel the consciousness of the Great Ones directly into human minds. Where the choir's implements maintain separation between user and cosmic force, Mensis technology seeks to eliminate that boundary entirely. The nightmare realm isn't something to be studied from a safe distance. It's humanity's destiny, a new plane of existence where the limitations of physical reality no longer apply. This ideological incompatibility might have remained merely philosophical if not for the practical implications. Both factions required resources, test subjects for their experiments, blood echoes for their research, rare materials from the Chalice dungeons for their tools. Both needed the Church's backing and protection. Most critically, both sought the same ultimate prize, the third umbilical cords, those pieces of great ones that could trigger humanity's metamorphosis. In a world of unlimited resources, perhaps they could have coexisted, each pursuing their own path to transcendence. But resources were not unlimited, and each faction's success inherently threatened the other's vision of humanity's future. The evidence of their conflict is written in blood across Yahar'gul. Edgar, our choir spy discovered in the nightmare of Mensis, represents just one known agent in what must have been an extensive intelligence war. The choir didn't just send one spy, they created an entire network, watching Yahar'gul, monitoring the school's activities, trying to understand what Micolash was planning. But Mensis was far from defenseless. They responded with characteristic brutality, kidnapping choir members and healing church clerics alike. In the cells beneath Yahar'gul, we find the most damning evidence: a choir member, still in their distinctive white robes, tied to a chair and left to die. This wasn't just murder, it was a message. The weapons each faction employed against the other reveal the depth of their understanding of each other's weaknesses. The school of Mensis equipped their hunters with the Tinnitrus and Tiny Tinnitrus, weapons that channel bolt damage, the very element that tears through the kin, those cosmic beings the choir cultivated and communed with. Every Yahar'gul hunter carrying these weapons was essentially armed for war against the choir's creations, against the celestial emissaries, the brainsuckers, even against those touched by Ebrietas' influence. This wasn't coincidence or general preparation, this was targeted armament for a specific enemy. The story of Archibald adds another layer to this conflict. Once a member of the choir, Archibald became obsessed with the dark beasts and their self-generating bolt energy. His research led him to create both the Tinnitrus and the Spark Hunter badge, innovations that should have benefited the choir. Yet these weapons ended up in the hands of Mensis hunters. Did Archibald defect? Was he kidnapped and forced to work for the school? Or did Mensis steal his research after eliminating him? The game leaves this ambiguous, but the result is clear. Knowledge flowed from the choir to Mensis, whether through betrayal, coercion, or theft. The escalation of this shadow war can be traced through the increasing desperation of both factions' experiments. The choir's research hall, that terrible place where patients' heads were systematically enlarged to accommodate eyes on the inside, shows them pushing the boundaries of their supposedly careful methodology. The failed experiments that became the living failures, those cosmic kin who attack with arcane fury but possess no true consciousness, suggest that even the choir's measured approach was yielding more disasters than successes. Pressure from Mensis' rapid progress may have forced them to accelerate their timeline, to take risks they wouldn't have considered in calmer times. Meanwhile, the school of Mensis prepared for something unprecedented. The acquisition of Mergo's third umbilical cord, 1/3 of an infant Great One's consciousness, gave them the key to their ultimate ritual. But this wasn't just about gaining insight or evolving humanity. The Mensis ritual was designed to breach the barrier between nightmare and reality entirely, to summon consciousness itself into the physical world. The red moon that hangs over Yahar'gul after the ritual's completion isn't just an atmospheric effect. It's a wound in reality itself, a place where the nightmare realm bleeds through into our world. The night of the Mensis ritual marked the point of no return for both factions. As Micolash and his scholars performed their dark ceremony in Yahar'gul, something went catastrophically wrong. or perhaps catastrophically right, depending on one's perspective. The ritual succeeded in making contact with Mergo, the infant Great One, whose consciousness exists only in the nightmare realm. But the human mind wasn't meant to experience such direct contact with a Great One's consciousness. The entire population of Yahar'gul was instantly killed. Their bodies fused together into grotesque amalgamations, their blood and flesh reformed into the one Reborn, a massive, writhing attempt to create a Great One through sheer accumulation of human biomass. But death wasn't the end for the school of Mensis. Their consciousness, led by Micolash, was pulled into the nightmare of Mensis, a realm of their own creation, where they could continue their research free from physical limitations. In a twisted sense, they achieved exactly what they wanted: direct, unmediated contact with a Great One, existing in the same realm as the cosmos itself. But they also became prisoners of their own success, trapped in an endless nightmare, unable to return to the waking world, unable to truly die. The brain of Mensis stands as perhaps the most horrific result of their experiments, a massive amalgamation of human consciousness, studded with eyes, constantly perceiving all realities simultaneously. Whether this was intentional or an accident barely matters. The school of Mensis had become the very thing they sought to study, transformed so completely that they could no longer be called human in any meaningful sense. They achieved transcendence, but at the cost of everything that made them individuals, everything that gave their research meaning in the first place. For the choir, the Mensis ritual spelled disaster of a different kind. The breach in reality that the ritual created didn't just affect Yahar'gul, it destabilized the careful balance the choir had maintained in their own experiments. The orphanage's controlled environment became contaminated with nightmare influence. The celestial emissaries, once docile and manageable, grew aggressive and unpredictable. Ebrietas herself, that abandoned Great One, who had been so willing to share her knowledge, began to show signs of distress, her mournful cries echoing through the upper cathedral ward as she sensed the cosmic disruption Mensis had caused. The upper cathedral ward itself became a battlefield as the choir struggled to maintain control. The brain-suckers, those grotesque beings that drain insight from their victims, may have originally been choir creations designed to harvest knowledge, but after the Mensis ritual, they turned feral, attacking anyone who entered their domain. The celestial emissaries, once proud examples of controlled evolution, became hostile guardians, attacking intruders with devastating, arcane projectiles. The carefully ordered experiment had collapsed into chaos. The irony of both factions' fate cannot be ignored. The choir, who sought careful, controlled ascension, saw their experiments run wild, their test subjects turned against them, their Great One patron driven to madness. The school of Mensis, who sought to shatter all barriers and embrace the nightmare directly, got exactly what they wanted: eternal existence in a realm of cosmic horror, but without the ability to share their discoveries or guide humanity's evolution. Both achieved a form of transcendence, but neither in the way they intended. As the Church's two most powerful factions destroyed themselves, Yahar'gul suffered the consequences. Without the choir's careful management of the beast scourge's more esoteric aspects, and without Mensis's brutal but effective containment methods, the city's defenses crumbled. The blood moon summoned by the Mensis ritual didn't just affect the school, it drove the entire city into a frenzy of bloodlust and transformation. Beasts roamed freely through streets once protected by church hunters. The healing blood, once carefully distributed and monitored, became contaminated with influences from the nightmare realm. The player's arrival in Yahar'gul occurs at the nadir of this conflict, when both factions have essentially ceased to exist as functional organizations. The choir is reduced to a few survivors hiding in the upper cathedral ward, their experiments abandoned, their great one patron mourning in the cosmic altar room. The school of Mensis exists only in the nightmare realm, with Micolash as their sole coherent representative, and even his sanity is questionable at best. The player becomes the final arbiter of their conflict, choosing whether to end their suffering or join them in their respective forms of transcendence. When we face Micolash in his nightmare realm, we're not just fighting a boss, we're confronting the ultimate expression of Mensis philosophy. His famous words, "Grant us eyes, grant us eyes," aren't just the ravings of a madman. They're a prayer, a desperate plea for the insight needed to fully comprehend the cosmic truth he's touched, but cannot fully grasp. His excitement at the player's arrival, a hunter is a hunter, even in a dream, shows that even in his transformed state, he understands that conflict, that struggle, that violence is necessary for evolution. The school of Mensis didn't just accept violence as a tool, they saw it as fundamental to transcendence itself. Similarly, when we confront Ebrietas in the altar of despair, we witness the choir's philosophy taken to its logical conclusion. Here is a great one, mourning over the corpse of Rom, the vacuous spider, another human who achieved a form of transcendence, but at tremendous cost. The choir thought they could learn from Ebrietas, could use her knowledge to guide humanity's evolution. But Ebrietas' presence in that altar, her obvious grief, suggests that even great ones can suffer, can feel loss, can be touched by tragedy. The choir's careful plans couldn't account for the emotional, the spiritual, the fundamentally unknowable aspects of cosmic existence. The weapons and tools left behind by both factions tell the story of their conflict in mechanical terms. The choir badge, which grants access to their arsenal, opens up a selection of items that prioritize intelligence and careful application of arcane power. These aren't weapons of war so much as instruments of research that happen to be deadly. The school of Mensis, by contrast, leaves behind implements of domination and control, cages that forcibly grant insight, rituals that tear through dimensional boundaries, creatures summoned from nightmare to serve as soldiers in the waking world. The NPCs we encounter, who have connections to either faction, paint a picture of the human cost of this conflict. The suspicious beggar, who may or may not be connected to the school's experiments, represents the thin line between human and beast that both factions sought to transcend. The chapel dweller, innocent and kind, shows us what the common people of Yahar'gul were like before the church's experiments transformed their city into a nightmare. These aren't just background characters, they're reminders of what the choir and Mensis forgot in their pursuit of evolution, the value of humanity as it already exists. The architectural legacy of both factions reveals their fundamental approaches to transcendence. The upper cathedral ward, home to the choir, is built vertically, reaching toward the cosmos with towers and bridges that seem to defy gravity. Every structure points upward, toward the stars, toward ascension. The orphanage, the research hall, the cosmic altar, all are designed to lift humanity up, to raise consciousness to a higher plane. The very act of climbing to reach these areas mirrors the choir's philosophy of gradual elevation. Yahar'gul, the unseen village, tells a different architectural story. It's hidden, sunken, turned inward on itself. The prison cells beneath the surface, the ritual areas concealed from view, the way the entire village seems to exist in a pocket separate from the rest of Yahar'gul. Everything about Mensis' domain speaks to submersion, to going deeper rather than higher. When the blood moon rises after their ritual, Yahar'gul doesn't ascend. It's pulled into nightmare, dragged down into a realm beneath or beside normal reality. The role of the third umbilical cords in both factions' plans deserves special attention. These items, described as 1/3 of an umbilical cord from infant Great Ones, represent the most direct connection possible between human and cosmic consciousness. The choir possessed at least one, found in their orphanage, suggesting they saw it as a tool for careful study and gradual application. The school of Mensis used Mergo's cord as the catalyst for their ritual, showing they viewed it as a key to immediate transformation. Both understood the cord's importance, but their different approaches to using them encapsulate their entire philosophical divide. The timing of events suggests the conflict reached its crescendo during old Yahar'gul's burning. While the lower church was dealing with the beast plague outbreak in that district, while hunters were putting citizens to the torch, the upper echelons were engaged in their own war. The distraction provided by old Yahar'gul's crisis may have given Mensis the opportunity they needed to complete their ritual without choir interference. Or perhaps the choir was too busy trying to contain their own failing experiments to stop what was happening in Yahar'gul. Either way, the church's greatest crisis, the burning of an entire district, coincided with its internal civil war reaching its climax. The fate of Edgar, our choir spy in the nightmare of Mensis, serves as a microcosm of the entire conflict. Sent to gather intelligence, he became trapped in the very thing he was sent to observe. His presence in the nightmare isn't just as a prisoner, he's been incorporated into it, made part of the realm itself. When we encounter him, he attacks us, not out of malice, but out of necessity. He's become part of the nightmare's ecosystem, a choir member transformed by Mensis methodology into something that serves their realm. It's the perfect metaphor for how the conflict consumed both factions. In trying to destroy each other, they became twisted versions of what they opposed. The relationship between the two factions and the other groups within the healing church adds layers to the conflict. The school of Mensis maintained connections with the witches of Hemwick, those eye-collecting crones who seem to exist on the periphery of the church's structure. These witches, with their knowledge of eye-gathering and their creation of the Mad Ones, provided Mensis with resources and knowledge that existed outside the church's official channels. The choir, meanwhile, maintained its position as the church's elite through official channels, their white garb marking them as the highest-ranking clerics below the vicar herself. The hunter's nightmare, that twisted reflection of Yahar'gul where blood-drunk hunters are sent, shows us what happens when the pursuit of evolution goes wrong. While not directly created by either faction, the nightmare serves as a warning about what they were risking. The hunters trapped there sought power through blood, just as the choir sought it through communion and Mensis through ritual. They became drunk on their own strength, lost themselves to bloodlust, and ended up in an eternal punishment that mirrors what happened to both factions. The research hall patients who became the living failures, the Mensis scholars trapped in nightmare, all suffered similar fates to the blood-drunk hunters, just through different means. When we examine the blood ministration practices of both factions, we see how their conflict affected even the most fundamental aspect of the healing church's power. The choir refined the old blood, mixing it with cerebral fluid extracted from their research subjects, creating new forms of communion that emphasized insight over physical transformation. The school of Mensis corrupted blood with nightmare influence, using it not to heal or strengthen, but to break down the barriers between sleeping and waking consciousness. Both perverted the church's original mission of healing through blood, turning it into a tool for their respective visions of evolution. The presence of Great Ones in both factions' stories reveals the cosmic forces at play in their conflict. Ebrietas sided with the choir, or at least tolerated their presence and shared some measure of her knowledge. The amygdala, those spider-like Great Ones who cling to buildings throughout Yahar'gul, were revered by the school of Mensis, who saw in their ability to transport consciousness between realms a model for human transcendence. Mergo, the infant Great One, whose consciousness exists only in nightmare, became Mensis's ultimate goal. These weren't just abstract forces. They were active participants, willingly or unwillingly, in the Church's civil war. The concept of insight itself became weaponized in the conflict between the factions. The choir cultivated insight carefully, using it to perceive higher truths while maintaining sanity and human form. They created tools like the madman's knowledge, crystallized skulls containing specific revelations that could be consumed safely. The school of Mensis forced insight through trauma and ritual, using the Mensis cage to tear open the mind's eye, regardless of the cost to the wearer's sanity. Both understood that insight was necessary for evolution, but their methods for acquiring and utilizing it couldn't have been more different. As we near the end of this exploration, it's worth considering what might have happened if either faction had succeeded fully in their goals. If the choir had achieved their vision, would humanity have gradually evolved into a race of celestial emissaries, physically transformed but mentally intact, capable of perceiving and interacting with cosmic truth without losing their essential humanity? Or would the weight of cosmic knowledge have eventually crushed even the most carefully prepared minds? If the school of Mensis had pulled the entire world into nightmare as they intended, would humanity have found new freedom in a realm unbound by physical laws? Or would we have become prisoners in an eternal dream, unable to wake, unable to die, unable to escape the cosmic horror we'd invited in? The tragedy of the choir and the school of Mensis is that both were ultimately right about humanity needing to evolve, but both were wrong about how to achieve it. The choir's careful methodology couldn't account for the chaotic nature of cosmic truth. The school's radical approach couldn't preserve what made humanity worth evolving in the first place. They fought each other to stand still, each preventing the other from achieving their goals, both falling to the very forces they sought to harness. In the end, the player character, an outsider to this conflict, becomes the only one capable of resolving it. We can consume the third umbilical cords ourselves, face the moon presence, and achieve the transcendence both factions sought. We can submit to German and escape the dream, leaving both factions' ambitions unfulfilled. Or we can take German's place, becoming a guardian who ensures no one else falls to the temptations that destroyed the choir and Mensis. Each ending represents a different judgment on their conflict. Was their goal noble, but their methods flawed? Was the entire enterprise doomed from the start? Or is there a path to transcendence that neither faction could see, blinded as they were by their rivalry? The examination of this civil war within the healing church reveals the game's deepest themes about knowledge, power, and the price of ambition. The choir and the school of Mensis weren't villains in the traditional sense. They were seekers of truth who let their pursuit consume them. Their conflict warns us about the dangers of ideological extremism, about what happens when the ends are used to justify any means, about the cost of forgetting our humanity in the pursuit of becoming something more than human. As we conclude this deep dive into one of Bloodborne's most complex and tragic conflicts, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey through the hidden history of Yahar'gul. The story of the choir and the school of Mensis reminds us that in From Software's worlds, the greatest threats often come not from external monsters, but from the ambitions and conflicts within human institutions themselves. If you found value in this exploration, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps me continue uncovering these intricate stories, piecing together the fragments of lore that make these games so endlessly fascinating. Remember to like the video if you enjoyed it, and share your own theories about the choir and Mensis in the comments below. I love hearing different perspectives on these ambiguous stories. Until next time, fellow hunters, may you find your worth in the waking world. And remember, fear the old, blood, but fear. Human ambition even more. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next deep dive into gaming's greatest mysteries.